Jim Guest from the class of 1962, and our class is presenting this, really going to be a fascinating presentation from Professor Catherine Sanderson, who's in the psychology department. You've seen the summary in the program. I actually ran across this. There's something called One Day University that recruits the best teachers from the best colleges and universities and puts on a day-long program. This was in New York City, where you get a 1-hour course on the mind-body connection. And just thought that's really fascinating. She's got her interests range from sports psychology to health psychology to close relationships to also the research you'll talk about some here on how students, particularly young people's perceptions or misperceptions affect their behavior. And you've done some studies even on Amherst students relating to this. She's got an undergraduate degree from Stanford, PhD from Princeton. She's been here about 18 years or so. In your spare time, you raise 3 kids, you teach aerobics, you're the faculty liaison for the men's hockey team here at Amherst. So she's sort of the all-American Amherst person or something here, and look forward to the presentation.
Great, thank you so much for that very nice introduction. I know people are still coming in, so I'll just say I think there's seats in the back there and in the second row. I think there are a couple seats right there and a couple seats in the back. I don't want people to have to stand. There's a seat there, a couple seats over there. And is there a seat right there in the back? I think there's maybe a seat right there, one seat there. So sorry for people who, and there's a good seat back in that corner. So sorry about that for people who are just arriving. So I want to say, first of all, a big thanks to Jim for asking me to do this. And I will say it was especially nice as I got an email earlier this week from the alumni office that just said, could you please give us your biography so we can introduce you? And then promptly an email back came from somebody else in the alumni office that said, oh no, Jim Guest is going to introduce her, so you don't have to do anything. So I really appreciated that as well. So I'm delighted to be here today. I will talk for about 40 minutes. Certainly feel free to interrupt if you have questions. And I'll leave some time at the end for questions. I do know that somebody else is in this room at 11, so I think we'll be kicked out. But there's a great new talk at 11 by another Amherst faculty member who's publishing a new book. And if you're free, I'd stay for that. So I'm going to be talking today about new science on the power of mind over body. And in particular, I'm going to talk about 3 specific things. I'm going to talk about ways in which thoughts, our beliefs, our attitudes, our thoughts influence different aspects of our physical well-being. So I'm going to talk first of all about how much we eat. So how much do we eat? Why do we eat? When do we eat? And how does that vary based on the surround that we're in? I'm then going to talk about the experience of pain and physical health. So sickness, well-being, etc. And I'll tell you why that photo's up later. And then I'm going to talk about attraction, love, and sex in a PG sort of way. I know there's some kids here. And so I'm going to talk about current reality TV. I'm going to talk about Dancing with the Stars. I'm going to talk about 9/11 widowers and firefighters. So I'm going to be talking about a bunch of different things related to these 3 general topics. And again, I'm sorry for people who are just coming in. I have come in late for meetings and sat on the steps right here, so totally do that. Or there's some seats in the front now as well. Okay, so first of all, I want to talk about how the appearance of food influences eating. And I want to start with a question. Here's my question. Please raise your hand if you've ever eaten when you're not hungry. Okay, so that's a pretty simple one. And that's a really good example of how technically, if you're eating, you should be eating because you're hungry. I'm hungry, I haven't eaten in a while, my stomach is growling, so I'm going to eat. But everybody eats during lots of times in which they're not particularly hungry. Why do you eat? All you people who raised your hand and said, I eat when I'm not hungry. Why? Why do you eat? Social, situational pressures. It's time. It's right. It's 6:30. It's time to eat some dinner. What else? It looks good. It looks good. The food looks really tasty. It smells good. So you have the aroma. Good. What else? It looks good. Okay, so appearance, smell. There's still something else. Stress, emotional eating. You're depressed, you're sad, and you're using the food to kind of get you out of that. And so there's lots of interesting research in psychology, including, and this goes back to your suggestion and your suggestion, if the food looks good, you are much more likely to eat it. Research has shown in restaurants that you get many more people to order dessert if you bring a dessert tray. The dessert tray is much better than the description. The physical dessert tray, oh my God, there it is, and I could have that, and oh, there it specifically is. And so those are all ways in which the appearance of food actually makes a real difference in terms of what we eat. So let me talk about a couple of studies that look at that. So first of all, very clever study done by Brian Wansink at Cornell looked at something called the endless bowl of soup. And he created this very clever experimental paradigm. So let me back up 1 second. Who here has ever eaten too much at a buffet? All right. And so a buffet is sort of the classic example of there is endless food. You can keep eating and eating and eating and eating, and it continues. So what he did in this study was he set up a situation in which you came in and had a bowl of soup. And so let's say this is the bowl of soup. In one condition, this bowl of soup was simply placed on a table, and you were told you can eat as much soup as you want. Every time you're finished with your bowl, just raise your hand, and the researcher will come out and get you some more soup. In the other condition, they had the bowl on a table, and they had this elaborate mechanism by which there was a vat of soup underneath the table and a tube that went into the bowl of soup. So every time you took a bite, it filled up. So you keep eating, and you can never make any progress. I mean, you're eating, and it's going, and it's going, and it's going. All right, so there's a case in which, in each condition, you can have as much soup as you want. You can keep eating and eating and eating the soup however much you want. However, in one condition, you actually have to say, oh, I finished the bowl, could I have another bowl? And in the other condition, you don't know when you finish the bowl because you're eating and you never finish the bowl. And what they find, of course, is that when people are in the condition in which the soup just continues to refill, they eat tons more. They eat tons more because there's not the prompt of, oh, should I really have 18 bowls of soup? You know, that there's not that sort of prompt, that you just continue to eat. So that's an example about how the availability of food really does encourage overeating, that if it's a buffet, if there's endless supplies, people tend to eat far more than they would in other situations. So that's the endless bowl of soup study. Next example, the size of popcorn buckets at the movies. So here's another condition in which you can go into any movie theater and have popcorn in any different size. However, the size of the bucket you get matters a lot. Because if you have the giant bucket of popcorn, even if it's unlimited refills, get whatever size you want, you can refill it as much as you want. If you have the giant vat of popcorn, you eat considerably more popcorn. Even if it's all, you can keep going back in any condition. So that's not particularly surprising. We've probably all probably overeaten popcorn at a movie. However, in another version of this study, they brought in people and actually showed them a movie and said you can have as much popcorn as you wanted. But what they did in this condition is they took very, very old, stale, tasteless popcorn. So it was bad popcorn. It was not the hot, buttery, salt, just made. It was old. It was stale. Nobody thought it tasted good. People, in fact, commented on how it didn't taste good. But guess what? They ate it. They ate a lot of it. It was bad. It tasted bad. The appearance wasn't good. The smell wasn't good. The taste wasn't good. But it was free. And so people continued to eat. So even in conditions in which the food sucks, you still continue to have this effect of if it's a big vat, you eat much more. Again, this sort of mindless eating. The shape of brownies. So now I'm going to talk to you about a different set of studies. And in this study, they brought in college students. It was done at Penn. And they said, we want you to arrive for the study hungry. It's really important that everybody arrives hungry. That's a really important part of the study. So please don't eat before you come into the study for at least 4 hours. So you arrive and you're hungry. People who are gathering, there are steps here that you could sit on if anybody wants to. There are steps in the middle. I just feel bad in terms of people waiting the whole time. So they brought in people to the lab. They were all hungry. And the students arrived, and there was this amazing smell of brownies wafting from this oven. So this amazing smell of brownies. This is so great. And you walk in, and you're hungry, and you smell these brownies. And the researcher takes the brownies out of the oven, and the smell gets even stronger as they come out of the oven. And so it's clearly a brownie. You know it's a brownie. They've told you it's a brownie. It smells like a brownie. But the researcher has made the brownie in the shape of dog poop. So it is a brownie. You know it's a brownie. Nobody thinks it's dog poop covered with brownie or whatever. It's actually brownie. And yet, people have trouble eating it. And so that goes, again, with the appearance of food. That I'm really not supposed to eat dog poop, And I know it's not dog poop, but gosh, the appearance is really, really hard to overcome. So there's a case in which you see this opposite effect, in which people actually have trouble eating something when the appearance doesn't really fit with what they are thinking. Okay, so those are examples about how the appearance of food influences eating. Let me talk about another example. Who we are eating with. And a couple people, when I said, why do you eat when you're not hungry? People said, for social reasons, socialization. Who we're eating with also has a big influence on how much we eat. So the presence of large groups. Who here has overeaten at, a wedding or Thanksgiving or whatever, a family reunion when you're with a lot of people? You eat a lot more when you're with a lot of people. That's in part because meals last longer. You keep eating and eating and eating because everybody's sitting around. It's also because you're not as focused on how much you're eating because you're enjoying the conversation because other things are going along, et cetera. So larger groups lead to more eating. But more interestingly, who you're eating with also matters. And I want to talk about a very clever study that my Amherst College, I teach an intro to psychology class, my Amherst College students get a real kick out of. So in this study, they brought in women, undergraduate women, and they said, you're going to be having a conversation with a potential dating partner. And it's just a get-to-know-you conversation. Let's just see how it goes. So you read a little biography of the guy, and in one condition, the guy was a real stud. So he was a varsity athlete, he was valedictorian, he was heading to law school, he played on the football team, his interests were travel and photography, and he seemed like really, a great catch. In the other condition, the guy was a dud. So the guy was a C student, the guy had no interest other than making money. He had applied to law school and been rejected. He had tried out for the football team and had been cut. And he was a copy editor for the student newspaper. The other kid was the editor of the student newspaper. So one condition, the guy's a stud. One condition, the guy's a dud. So the women sit down, and one of the two guys supposedly comes and sits with her. Of course, the guy's actually a friend of the experimenters, not a real potential dating partner. And as the researcher's leaving the room, she puts down a bowl of M&Ms on the table and says, oh, hey, these were left over from last night's psychology department party. Help yourself if you want some M&Ms. So guess what the only thing is the researcher's interested in now? How many M&Ms? It's the only thing they care about. The whole study is set up to figure out how many M&Ms the woman is going to eat in those two conditions. So the woman's talking to the dud, C student, only wants to make money, rejected from everything. Guess how many M&Ms she eats? A lot. Yeah, wait, I want that one. Oh, well, when I'm hungry, I didn't have lunch, whatever. Okay, how about if she's talking to the stud? Like one. She had a late lunch. One is good. And that, of course, really mimics what we think about in daily society in terms of women under-eating to have the representation of femininity, that women only having Diet Coke and a salad and nothing else. Because again, the sort of image of women in the media is this heavy, heavy emphasis on thinness, and it's extraordinarily important to have that presentation. Now, I described this to my intro to psychology class, full of 18-year-old men and women, and I always sort of wonder to myself ethically, what if there's a guy in that room going, women always eat a ton. Right? It's like an awkward, right, situation of, okay, but, there it is. So I do always feel a little bad at that moment. Anyway, so that's, of course, what we think about in terms of the presence of desirable dating partners. It influences how much women in particular eat. So why? Why does that occur? Why do the presence of different eating partners influence how much we eat? How does that matter? And I want to talk about a few different things. So one is that, as I said before, the salience of the thinness norm for women is extreme. That this is an actual female model, who, of course, meets all the diagnostic criteria for anorexia. And that is sort of emblematic of what college women in particular are exposed to in terms of what they should look like and the pressure towards extreme thinness. So that salience really means that there is a false sense of what women should weigh. A study was done a few years ago with teenage girls who were readers of the magazine 17, the best-selling magazine for teenage girls. And they asked these girls, who were in their teenage years, thinking about as a teenager, as a young woman, what would you ideally, if you could choose, what would you ideally weigh and how tall would you be? So they collected this data from these girls. What's your ideal height and what's your ideal weight? So let's just do a little guessing game here. What's the ideal height of a Teenage girl. What do they want? How tall do they want to be? 5'7" is the answer. I heard that from a few different sources. Okay, 5'7" is the answer. Okay, so let's go with 5'7", and that's the right answer. What's the weight they want to be that goes with 5'7"? Okay, so I heard 110, and that's wrong. And 105 is also wrong. 100. 100 is the right answer. And a girl who is 5'7" and 100 pounds meets the diagnostic criteria of anorexia. That's a BMI of like 17.1. Anything below 18 is literally anorexic. And so the goal, the ideal, is really at something that is dangerously thin. It is dangerously thin. It is not healthy. And so the problem, of course, with that is that the salience of this thinness norm means that women, that girls, are trying to reach this fake ideal, because of course that's not a healthy body weight. It's not really even an achievable body weight through normal means. And one of the problems that occurs is that women and girls then believe that everybody else is striving for this thinness norm that many women, many girls themselves don't really feel comfortable with, don't really feel comfortable with that sort of a norm. And this gets into some of my own research that I've done at Amherst College. I've done at Princeton, where I was before. I've actually done in collaboration with a former thesis student of mine at Amherst College who then went to London, and we've done a follow-up study comparing girls in London to girls in the United States in high school. So a lot of this research is near and dear to my own heart, and I want to just talk about a little bit of it. And what we have shown is that when girls arrive in a college environment, so when a freshman arrives at Amherst College, a freshman arrives at Princeton University, if you ask them, how tall are you and how much do you weigh? They give a pretty consistent answer, and then you say, how much do other women weigh and how tall are they? And cutting across sort of nuances based on height, on average when women arrive at Amherst or Princeton, selective places, they weigh about 130 pounds. That's crossing over lots of different height variations, but on average it's about 130. And if you say to them, well, how much do other women weigh? They say about 130. So there's nothing particularly interesting there. They weigh around 130. They think other women weigh around 130. It all kind of makes sense. However, if you go back to women 6 months later, so February of their freshman year, and then you say, how much do you weigh? So what's happened to women over the first semester of college? They've gained some weight. Okay, so they've gone, and on average, they've gone from about 130 to about 135. So that's on average, they've gained about 5 pounds. So, and they're aware of it. Their pants aren't fitting as well. They're sort of looking a little differently in the mirror. They're sort of recognizing the changes in their body. So they've actually gained about 5 pounds, and they're aware of that. They say about 135. However, then you say to them in February, okay, and what do other women on your campus weigh? And what do they say?
130.
Lower than 130. Say it again. 125. Okay, so they know they're getting heavier. They recognize it, they see it, and yet at the same time, they believe other women are getting thinner. So, and it really doesn't make any sense because when they arrive, there's a zero discrepancy. There's no discrepancy between what they weigh and what they think other women weigh. You go back 6 months later, there's a 10-pound discrepancy. And what's particularly odd is that these are women who are living together in a dorm. They're showering together. They're exercising together at the gym. They're eating in the same dining hall. And weight is not something like IQ or political attitudes. It's obvious. And so if you see yourself gaining weight, you're not recognizing, I'm gaining weight, so is everybody else. What you're saying is, I'm gaining weight, and everybody else is losing weight. And the problem is, the bigger the discrepancy, so some women have very small discrepancy, some women have a bigger than 10-pound discrepancy between what they weigh and what they think other women weigh. The bigger the discrepancy, the more you see signs of disordered eating. The more you see binging, purging, calorie counting, use of laxatives across the board, every possible dimension. So believing that you are discrepant from other women has real consequences in terms of disordered eating that is really problematic. So why does this happen? Why do you have this discrepancy? And that's really sort of the focus of my research, is looking at why does this discrepancy occur and what can we do to solve it. So an example that I use with Amherst College students that people really relate to is the following. And you all haven't been out of school that long to not be able to play along with this. So think back to your college days, or think ahead to your college days for the young people in this room. And And think about, was there ever a time in a lecture in which a professor said, do you have any questions? I hope the answer to that is yes for the Amherst alums. Now, who can remember a time in which the professor said, do you have any questions, and you had a question, and you didn't raise your hand? Why? Why did you not raise your hand when the person is saying, do you have any questions, and you do have one? So it's pretty straightforward, right? Why don't you raise your hand? It might be a stupid question. You don't want to look dumb. Okay, and students get that. They're like, yeah, I don't want to look dumb. Okay, but here's the interesting piece. When you looked around the room and nobody else is raising their hand, do you think, boy, they don't want to look dumb? No. They know all the answers. They don't have any questions. So that's the really interesting piece, is that you're sitting in a room, you know in your heart you have a question, that you're not raising your hand because you don't want to look stupid. And yet you look at everybody else in the room, they're doing the same thing you're doing, not raising their hand. Your behavior is the same as other people's, but you assume that their behavior is being driven by a different thing. They're just really smart. They don't know the answer. And I'm dumb, and I just don't want to look stupid. So we think this is a phenomenon that occurs all the time. As a professor, I'll say what's funny is nobody will have any questions, and somebody will have a question, you'll start giving the answer, and oddly enough, all the people who had no questions start writing down the answer. Which seems like unfair, right? No, put your pencil down, you had no question. So the interesting thing about that is that we think this is really what happens in terms of eating disorders, is that there's lots of normative pressure in our society for women to be thin and to present this sort of adherence to this thinness norm. And so women talk, and college women especially talk, about how little they've eaten and how much they've exercised. So women come back and say, oh, I've been so busy today, all I had was an apple, I skipped breakfast, and and I did 6 hours on the treadmill, and whatever. And what they don't talk about is, I was really bored and lonely last night, I ate 2 pints of ice cream in my room alone, followed by some Cheetos, again. And so the issue is that women are presenting this sort of adherence to the thinness norm, even if it doesn't fit what they're actually doing. And the picture I've chosen here is something that we call tray gazing, which is that what you'll see in Valentine Dining Hall is that women are very conscious of what's on their tray, because other people are looking at their tray. And it's a very public eating environment. And so, boy, you got to have the right foods on your tray, and that's more or less like salad and low-fat cottage cheese. And of course, if you have salad and low-fat cottage cheese, you're actually hungry later. And so you eat alone in your dorm, and everybody's eating alone in their dorm, but nobody's thinking anybody else is eating alone in their dorm. The same way as nobody thinks anybody has any questions. And so what you get is this gap between the public and the private, and that's what's really problematic. Okay, last thing I'm going to talk about, Snickers study, and then we'll move on to physical pain. Researcher Paul Rosen at Penn asked women, how embarrassed would you be to purchase these items at a drugstore? Condoms, Snickers, pregnancy test, tampons. What's the most embarrassing thing to purchase? That's it, Snickers. I'm having sex, I'm having unprotected sex, I like chocolate, oh my God, that's awful, terrible, how mortifying you must be. So again, case in point, this is what's awkward. I'm a woman, I like to eat chocolate, there must be something wrong with me. I can't let people know in public. I could mail order the Snickers. That would be less embarrassing. Okay, so let me move on now. Thoughts influence pain and physical health. And I want to talk about then, again, mind-body connection, not just with food, but related to pain and your physical well-being. So first of all, power of name-brand drugs. Who here has made a deliberate attempt to purchase a higher-priced name-brand drug as opposed to that, CVS or Costco or whatever brand? All right, people do it all the time because you have the belief, if it's Advil, it's going to work. Now, pharmacologically, of course, it's exactly the same. There is no difference at all between Advil or Tylenol or anything else than the other brand. But the issue is people really believe there is. And in fact, that belief leads them to work better. So the belief that it works better is actually helpful, even though the pharmacological drug properties do not differ. And you can get this effect in all sort of interesting ways. You can get it in terms of what pain relief you take, but you can also get it even in what we call placebo surgery, which sounds like an ethical nightmare, I know. So let me talk about the extent that it's not just this power of belief about name brand drugs, but you can get it in something as serious as surgery. So in this study, which was fully approved by an institutional review board, I'll say, because otherwise it's all the questions I'll get will be on how do those psychologists do that. Men who were being served at the Veterans Administration Hospital for knee pain were asked to participate in a study on the effectiveness of different kinds of knee surgery. So the men came in, and they were literally randomly assigned to one of three conditions. In one condition, they had regular arthroscopic knee surgery. In another condition, they were put under anesthesia, and the surgeon cut open their knee and then kind of scraped around on some of the cartilage and then sewed them up. Another condition, put them under anesthesia, cut the knee open, sewed the knee back up. Created a scar. Did nothing. Created a scar on the knee. That's it. And then, the nurses, doctors, other people who were interacting with them didn't know which of those three conditions they were in, which of those three surgeries they had received, and they tracked. How much pain relief did each of them need in recovery? How quickly did each of them walk? How quickly did each of them get released from the hospital? How much did they complain of pain? How quickly were they able to, progress through physical therapy? How much knee function did they have 6 months later? And guess what they found? Didn't matter at all. Didn't matter at all. Men in all three groups had the same rate of recovery, had the same pain medication, walked the same after. It didn't matter. But the idea is if you have surgery, you're like, hey, I had surgery. It's going to be better. They have fixed my knee. It's going to be better. I have this belief. I can do things I didn't used to do, although the only thing they did for you is create a scar in your knee. But that belief was enough that the men who had no surgery, a knee, scar, in fact improved at the same rate as men who'd had the arthroscopic knee surgery. This isn't to say that surgery is never necessary, it's all in your mind, but it is to say that the power of this belief that you're going to get better, that something has improved because somebody has done something, is very, very powerful. And it can extend beyond simply, does your headache get better faster, or are there actual other factors that can influence it? Let me talk about one more sort of powerful mind-body thing, and this is about the stereotypes that we have about old age. This is a very clever study done by John Barge at NYU, and what John Barge did was had college students come in to a psychology lab on like the 4th floor of the psychology department, in New York City, and he had them do a computer task. Didn't really matter what the task was because he didn't care about the task. But what happened during the computer task is that words that cued, in one condition, old age stereotypes, and in another condition were simply neutral words, were flashed subliminally. So you couldn't see the words, you didn't even know that you'd seen them, but there was just a millisecond, there was a flash of a word, Nobody reported recognizing the words, in any condition. So these were happening below the level of consciousness. So one set of words were neutral words. The other set of words were actually designed to be old age stereotypes. So it included things like shuffleboard and, Florida and, whatever. I won't go on. But they weren't things like arthritis and, diabetes, or, they weren't sort of negative health things, but they were things that were designed to trigger images of old age. So the students came in, they did one of these two computer tasks. One thing they got the neutral words, one thing they got the old age stereotypes. The researcher said, thank you so much, thanks for coming, this is a big help to science, whatever, bye. And then the student walked out of the research room, and as the student walked out of the research room, the researcher pushed a stopwatch. And there was an elevator at the end of the hall out of the psychology office. And all they wanted to see, how fast they walked. How fast they walked. That's it. And what they found was that people who'd been primed with old age words walked slower. This priming of these old age words led you to walk slower to the elevator than, now, again, it's a subtle effect. It's not like, somebody limped and, somebody ran or whatever. But it's a clear example of these stereotypes that are present in the environment can actually influence our physical behavior. John Barge has done a number of follow-up studies which include things like in one condition, same example of the study, but in one condition you're prompted with rude words, so like interrupt and criticize and whatever. In another condition, you're primed with really nice words, so friendly and polite and respectful or whatever. So they prime the kids with one of these two sets of words. And they tell the student, after you finish the computer task, just bring your questionnaire over to my office and I'll pay you for the subject, pay you for participating in the study. So the student comes in, does the computer task, is primed with either the nice words or the rude words, and then walks over to the researcher's office to get their money. In all conditions, the researcher is then in a heated discussion with a colleague. I don't know what we should do tonight. Should we go out to dinner? Should we go to a movie? I've heard this movie is good. How about Mexican? You know, again, there's this long conversation. And all they're waiting to see is what? Who interrupts? When will the person be like, excuse me, can I get my money? Whatever. And what they find, and they give the person 10 minutes. They give them 10 minutes to stand there. 10 minutes in New York. And even in New York, if you've been primed with the polite words, you don't interrupt. You stand there for 10 minutes. If you've been primed with the rude words, you're like, yeah, whatever, can I get my money? You know, again. And so it influences behavior, even if it's processed at this subliminal level. So these are all ways in which our thoughts, even our thoughts that are occurring below the level of consciousness, influence our behavior. Final set of things I want to talk about, relationships. So how do our relationships influence our physical well-being, our physical health? And I want to talk about 3 specific things. So first of all, the impact of friendships on sickness. Lots of research has shown that people with greater social support, so stronger networks of friends, of families, could be a spouse, could be a partner, could be a sibling, it doesn't matter who the person is, but people with stronger social networks live longer. Not only do they live longer, they also are better able to fight off infection. So in a clever set of studies by Sheldon Cohen at the University of Pittsburgh, he's brought in healthy college students. He's had them complete a measure of, you know, are there people you can turn to? How close do you feel to your family? You know your friends, et cetera. And then he inserts in their nostril a cold virus. So it's a direct, you know, syringe, nostril, you got the cold. And then he quarantines them for 2 weeks. So for 2 weeks, they live in this, you know, secluded environment. They're paid a lot of money. And he just figures out who gets the cold. So everybody gets the virus inserted in the nose. Everybody's getting it. And then he figures out who actually manifests it. And they do all sorts of measures. You know, they test for antibodies in the blood. They test for, you know, symptoms like sneezing and coughing and whatever. They also, in perhaps the most disgusting aspect of research, collect their used tissues and weigh them to measure mucus output. So there's all these sort of different measures. And what they find is if you have more friends, stronger social support network, you're much more likely to not ever develop the cold. You just don't ever get it. And other people with less of a strong network, in fact, manifest the cold. So having these strong social support networks actually leads you to be able to protect yourself from illness in that sense. There's also really interesting research, a lot of this is being done now at Harvard, about the contagion of both smoking and obesity. And I was lucky enough to find this picture of 2 obese people smoking. What research has now shown is that if you have friends, family members, spouses who have either of those sort of health risky behaviors, being severely overweight or smoking, you are much more likely to catch it yourself. They've done longitudinal studies looking at sort of patterns of close relationships over time and having siblings, neighbors, friends, you know, spouses, et cetera, who engage in either of those behaviors, you're much more likely to develop it yourself. There's probably lots of reasons for that. You know, people who smoke offer cigarettes to other people. You get used to the smell. It's easier to have access to. People who are obese are maybe more likely to have, you know, neighbors with the same kinds of eating, dietary patterns, you know, exercise habits, et cetera. But so the people that we're friends with, the people in our world, our social networks also influence the likelihood that we engage in particular kind of health-related behaviors. So there's interesting research now trying to go in and make waves and make behavior changes in sort of broader social networks. A lot of the most interesting research on this is now being done in North Carolina looking at churches. So going into church groups and trying to sort of make a change in a lot of people who all sort of feel this close connection, and they've had a lot of success in trying to change, you know, increase fruit and vegetable consumption, et cetera. And last thing I want to talk about, the benefits of having a dog. So I will start off by saying I actually don't like dogs. And I have one. And I love that dog. That dog is great. But, and I'll talk about more about that later. But lots of research has shown people with pets live longer. they have fewer doctor visits, they are happier, they are healthier, and in fact, they live longer. So research with elderly people in Florida has looked at people who have a dog versus don't have a dog, number of doctor visits, number of serious health incidents. People with a dog live longer, fewer doctor visits, et cetera. Now, in what may be good news for some of you and bad news for others, it's only the dog. Cat, doesn't matter. Ferret, goldfish, hamster, rabbit, snake, turtle, nothing. It's the dog. That's it. So it's not pet ownership, it's dog ownership. And that, of course, raises lots of interesting questions, right? So what is it about the dog? So who has a theory? Who has a dog-related theory?
Unconditional love.
Okay, so unconditional love in a way that, the dismissive, snooty cat doesn't give you, okay? Yeah.
It forces you to walk every day.
Right, and so that's an interesting thing, is that the dog is the only animal, nobody walks their turtle or whatever. So that's an interesting question too, is that maybe the dog is really just, you got to get some exercise. And so the dog is irrelevant. If you had anybody else who was making you walk every day, you'd also live longer, okay? Good. Any other theories? There's another one that I kind of like.
Acceptance. I mean, the dog accepts you and doesn't hold grudges.
Right. The dog, no matter what you do, the dog will lick you and jump and yes.
Doesn't talk back.
Yeah.
How about the dog needs you to take care of him?
Mm-hmm. Right. So there's a sense of I've got to live. What would happen to my dog? I've got to be there for the dog. Absolutely. There's another thing that I think happens that's interesting.
More communicable diseases? Oh, come on.
All right. There's another interesting thing I think that happens, which is that who here has ever walked a dog and have somebody come up to you and start a conversation about the dog? So I also think that the dog may be a way of getting more human support, right? The people are like, where's that person who walks a dog? I haven't seen her in a few days. I should check in. That there's also the dog is a conversation starter. So the dog may help people kind of get more connected to their neighbors, their friends, et cetera. But so there's interesting research that's now being done to look at this effect of pets. What's that? Chick magnet. Yes, exactly. And that would be an interesting title really for a paper, right? Yes. Okay, last bit of things about thoughts influencing interpersonal attraction. I want to talk about a very clever study called the Shaky Bridge Study. It was done a number of years ago at Cornell. And for people who haven't visited Cornell, deep ravines around campus, that's salient for this particular study. They brought in men and had them fill out a questionnaire. Doesn't matter about what. And then they said, when you're finished with the questionnaire, please walk it over to the female experimenter who's on the other side of the room. I'm sorry, the other side of the bridge. It was done outside. So in one condition, so the men filled out this questionnaire. In one condition, the men walked over this ravine in a sturdy, stable bridge with high handrails. So they just simply walked. The bridge has high handrails. It was very stable, et cetera. In the other condition, the bridge had very, very low handrails, and it was wobbly and shaky. So as you walked, you had the feeling you could complete the study or you could plunge to your death over the side. So you walk across one of these two bridges, and the female experimenter says, thank you so much. I really appreciate your help. And by the way, if you have any questions about the study, here's my phone number. What's the only thing they care about? Who what? Who calls? Who calls based on which bridge? If you walk across the sturdy bridge, you don't have any questions. You don't need to follow up. If you walk across the shaky bridge, a significantly higher percentage of men called with a follow-up question. Maybe they could talk about over dinner. And again, the idea behind that study is we're very bad at telling why we feel something. So the men walk across the bridge. They have this feeling when they get to the woman after walking across the shaky bridge, they're breathing heavily, their heart is beating fast, their hands are clammy. And of course, it's because they thought they were just going to die. But instead, they're like, I must love you. I'm looking at you. And look, oh my God, look at my body. I'm just like, I'm a Twitter. And so that's really the issue, is that you have this idea that when you have these sensations, you've forgotten why. And the why is, you just thought you were going to die. But when you're looking at her, you don't think that. You're like, I must love you. And so again, you call with a question. So that's a study that, was in the lab, and it was done in, 62 or something. It was done a long time ago. However, nice, I think it actually might have been 62. But so what does that have to do with real life? Because this was an artificial study. So who here has heard about the Bachelorette, Bachelor TV dating shows? Yeah. Well, if you pick up any People magazine, it's all over. So what happens, for people who don't know, somebody goes on TV, they date 25 people, they gradually whittle one of them off, and 6 weeks later, there's a proposal, and a romantic, kiss on the beach, true love, whatever, and then like 2 months later, what's happened? Yeah, it's run its course. They hate each other. That's the gist of it, and that just happens repeatedly, repeatedly, repeatedly. So I taught about the shaky bridge study in my introduction to psychology class a couple years ago, and a first-year student came up to me in the spring and said, "Professor Sanderson, I'm so glad I took your introduction to psychology class because it completely explains why Jake chose Brienne." And of course, that's just what you want to hear as a professor, right? That they're really, you can understand this now. But I went through and I looked, and you know what? She was totally right. So Caitlin had this idea, and absolutely right. And so the idea is that on these reality dating shows, here are examples of the dates they do as they are, whittling these dating partners. So one is they rappel down a skyscraper. Harness, the rope, whatever, down the skyscraper. They have shark diving. You're in a tank underwater with sharks, banging at your tank. And not only that, contestants, before they go on the show, fill out a list of fears. I'm scared of sharks. I'm scared of underwater. I'm scared of heights. And you do the thing that scares you. So what happens on these shows is you have people who are on TV. People are filming them every which way. You're doing totally romantic, exciting, adventurous dates. They go hella skiing and whatever. And you think you really do love them because of the surround. And they're forgetting the arousal is because of the sharks, because of the building, because of the camera. And at the end of the show, you don't have those things anymore. And you're just sitting around in your apartment, ordering Chinese food, watching 60 Minutes. And you're like, who the hell is this guy? Like, I don't even like him. Because again, you don't like him without the sharks and the building and the fear and the terror. So that's an example from TV. But it's also very clearly an explanation for what happened. And some of you may have read about this in New York Times or New York Magazine. There were a number of cases following 9/11 of firefighters who lost, brothers, not literal brothers, but people who worked in their firehouse, and the firefighters who survived, felt tremendous guilt, tremendous sadness, tremendous grief, tremendous loss, and really reached out to the widows of the women who lost, their own husbands, firefighters, in the 9/11 attacks. And in a few of those cases, firefighters actually left their own spouse and married and formed romantic attachments with these widows. Now, that's pretty clearly, at least partially explained by this feeling of everybody is feeling tremendous sadness. They're feeling grief. They're feeling all of these emotions of loss and terror and connection, and they're misattributing those feelings as this must be love, because the feelings are very powerful, but we're not very good at telling what those feelings really are. We're not really able to disentangle, do I feel this way because I'm about to jump over the shaky bridge, or do I feel this way because I'm in a shark tank, or do I feel this way about the person I'm with because of who that person is? And so the environment, the surround, can actually have a strong influence on how we interpret the own things that we're feeling. Okay, I am truly almost done. Last thing I'll talk about, downside of pornography. And I talk about this with my students for many reasons. And that is that lots of evidence also suggests that we compare our surround to other images, to other ideals, et cetera, in the media, in the world more broadly. So that when we're thinking about our own relationship, we're not just thinking about our own relationship, we're thinking about how that relationship compares with other possible relationships and other possible people. And what you find is that for college men, for adult men, those who have more exposure to pornography, magazines, books, movies, whatever, they think their own dating partners, their own spouses are what? Less attractive, less appealing, less sexually desirable. Because again, the comparison is between your own spouse, your own girlfriend, whatever, and these idealized airbrush images, surgically enhanced, in the media. So I describe this as a really good example of sort of the comparison effect. The comparison effect is very strong, and so surrounding yourself with other kind of ideals actually can interfere with your own relationship satisfaction. I also take that opportunity to tell my first-year Amherst students that if Amherst men complain about how the women here are not very attractive, you have a sense of what they're doing in their spare time. That's useful. And then finally, I want to talk about the benefits of rose-colored glasses, the benefits of intimacy-colored glasses. And for a long time, psychologists thought, happy, healthy, psychologically well-adjusted people see the world in an accurate and realistic sense. That's kind of a hallmark of being psychologically healthy. It's actually totally wrong. People who are psychologically healthy are delusional. They idealize, they think of themselves as better than they actually are, they think of themselves as nicer, more attractive, smarter, funnier, everything than they actually are. And this is because that's actually healthy. It's healthy to believe it's going to work out okay and good things happen to good people and everything. And so in fact, in happy relationships, you see your partner as better than they actually are. And we are really good at doing that. So if you bring in college student dating couples and you have them complete questionnaires and then you give them some feedback about their partner, you say, oh, as it turns out, your partner is really, really stubborn, like extraordinarily stubborn, one of the most stubborn people we've ever seen. How do you take stubborn and make it good? Strong, person of persistence, really good conviction. It's really, I love that stubbornness. Person of real integrity. Another thing, they bring in college students and they say, oh my goodness, your partner is super cheap. This is like the stingiest, cheapest person I've ever seen. How do you take stingy and cheap and make it good? Frugal, cares about our family, cares about our future. I love that about him. Again, so people are very good about seeing the positive in whatever situation. And so seeing the world in rose-colored glasses, seeing yourself, seeing your loved ones, it's a great predictor of relationship satisfaction. Don't see your partner as they are. Think about them better. Here are my 3 kids who are, really attractive and smart. And I have friends who think their kids are attractive and smart, but they're not. But I don't say anything, because it'd be rude, because mine are. All right. So finally, conclusions, information you can use. Engage in mindful eating. Think about what you're eating. Your eating should not be driven by the fact that it's free in a large quantity, endlessly piped in from the bottom of the table, stale popcorn, etc. Think about what you're eating. It's an important aspect of maintaining health. Be aware of false norms. Other women are not as thin as you think they are, and they're eaten in private. Eat some chocolate. Buy the cheap brand and put it in an Advil container. You can donate that savings to Amherst College. That would be like a win. Get a dog. I have the name of a shelter I can give you after the talk if anybody's looking for today. Create physiological arousal. Do things that are exciting with your spouse, with your loved ones. Roller coasters, adventure travel, tango dancing, etc. Do exciting things. It's important for early relationships. It's also important for long-term marriages. Idealize your loved ones. See them as better than they actually are, just like you see yourself. And that's me. I'm glad to take questions. I know we have a few minutes. I'm glad to take questions. I'm glad for people to reach out and talk to me at a different time. I'm easy to find on the website. And thank you all for coming. Sorry about the crowded seating conditions for people, etc. And I think I have a couple minutes for questions, right? And so I'll take a couple questions here, and then when they kick me out of the room, I'll just go to the lobby, and people can ask questions later on. Okay, I saw you first.
Any correlation between religious belief and health?
Yeah. So
I think I've read some studies that say there is a possibility.
right. So the question is about religious beliefs and health. There is a strong association. The people who have greater religiosity, greater spirituality, also have greater health. It's not exactly clear how that goes. It's kind of like the dog relationship. It might be because certain religions say don't drink, don't smoke. It might be because religions provide people with a strong sense of social support, so there are other people looking out for you, et cetera. But yeah, there's a strong correlation between religion and well-being. I saw you.
Are there resources of your work on public internet? Or just
Absolutely, yes, yes. The links to the links to anything I've published are actually on the Amherst College website. You can also contact me, and I can get you these sites or other things, etc. Yes.
With the placebo surgery, did you also have the negative effects if people thought the surgery wasn't going to go well for them? They were scared about it. Did they then have a bad result?
So in this study, they didn't test that. They didn't test that effect, but actually they call that a nocebo effect. That's actually a term, nocebo. And so if you think that something isn't going to work, yeah, it's much more likely to not work. That part of the issue is you got to believe it. You got to believe it. Yes.
It seems like a convergence point for a lot of things you're talking about would be Facebook, even though I don't have a lot of experience there. How does Facebook?
There is fascinating research now being done looking at Facebook. And I mean, tons of psychology studies are looking at Facebook. I'll say one really interesting example that I'm going to talk about in my close relationship seminar next year, and that is that people who are lonely write much more negative things about themselves on Facebook. So they'll write like, oh, another date rejected me or whatever. Whereas people who are not lonely will write much more positive things. So there's a lot of sort of self-presentational stuff going on in terms of Facebook is the life you present. And you can present a more positive or less positive. That's a great question. Yes?
Your insidious blind date experiment, you inferred a gender effect. Have you switched genders? Namely, have you said to a guy, here's a girl who's just terrific, okay, going to law school, et cetera,
Yeah.
and then have someone who says, I'm flunking out, okay, but I really would like to go to bed with you, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so that's a great question. So in that particular study, they didn't do it, and I think it was because it was done at a school that was all male at the time. But the research that I think is the most interesting and relevant to your point is that if you look at men versus women in terms of what they want in a dating partner, it's different. So the things that women present about are different than the things that men present about. And so for women, when they're looking at a dating partner, a lot of it is frankly not appearance. A lot of it is about income potential. So it's are you going to law school? Did you go to a prestigious college, et cetera. For men, the physical appearance becomes a much more salient factor. And so that's the sort of the difficulty in doing the switch. Now, one thing I think they've done that is relevant to your question, though, which is interesting, is they've brought in men who are high and low in self-esteem. And they've said, how would you feel about marrying somebody who makes more money than you? Men who are low in self-esteem say what? No, I would not like that. And there's been some sort of funny studies about for men, if you say like, I want to be a housewife or a flight attendant, that actually is much more appealing than I want to be a lawyer or a neurosurgeon. So it's like the reverse. Oh, men don't self-present about M&Ms. Men don't self-present about M&Ms. Men self-present about alcohol. I can drink you under the table. I can't eat out M&M you under the table. But men who are high in self-esteem, if you say, how would you feel if your wife made more money than you, what do they say? Oh, that'd be great. Maybe I won't have to work. I hope she makes a lot more money than me. So you do get this major shift in terms of how do men feel about themselves.
Catherine, I think we've got to finish up.
Okay, yes.
The next group to come in, but thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you all for coming today.